Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Week 2, or is it Week 3 waivers Q&A? No one can say for sure. It's waivers after Week 2 for Week 3. I am Patrick Daugherty, joined by our resident waivers guru, Kyle Dvorchak. We're talking about all the top ads, maybe some of the top drops, some of the top trade targets as we head into Week 3 of the fantasy football season. We're finally starting to get trends, some patterns, data to read way too much into. Kyle, after 2 weeks of games, lots of players to panic on. I'm sure we'll hear about a lot of panic in this Q&A tonight. I'm doing plenty of panicking. Actually, I'm actually not panicking that much yet because I'm never a pure zero RB drafter, Kyle. I don't know if you heard, this is the year where you actually want to have running backs so far, and so I'm sitting pretty in almost all my leagues. Kyle, I think a running back might be the waiver ad of the week. Let's just begin the show real quick talking about who is the waiver wire ad of the week for Week 3. Who are we unloading our fab on?
I'm actually going to throw you a curveball because Carson Steele was my ad of the week heading into about an hour ago, and we get updates on Cooper Kupp's injury that he is a candidate to be placed on IR. Puka Nacua has already been placed on IR. A terrible situation for the Rams. A pretty solid situation for fantasy managers who are scavenging for a flex play, which is now Demarcus Robinson, Matthew Stafford's de facto wide receiver one. Their defense is going to be putting them in shootouts. We know Stafford can chuck the ball, and now his only choice is Demarcus Robinson. So after 2 weeks of absolute chaos, I think he's a legit flex plus kind of player.
He's the only guy you can count on right now in that Rams receiver core, where Tutu Atwell is just a role player. He's a career role player. He will have to be more involved now, maybe a little more than a role player, but that's just what he is. Tyler Johnson, the definition of just a guy. Yeah. With all due apologies to RotoViz, Tyler Johnson is just a guy. Colby Parkinson is – I don't even know what Colby Parkinson is, man. He's hurting me. That's one thing he's doing for sure. I had several David and Njoku teams where I thought Colby Parkinson was going to be the antidote for Week 2, but he was not that. But makes a lot of sense to start with Demarcus Robinson. But then we will start. Everyone wants to know about this Chiefs backfield, getting a lot of questions on it. So talk about Carson Steele. And let's say Samaje Perine, who is more rostered than Carson Steele. But yeah, he's a lot less lower. I don't know where I'm going with that. Samaje Perine, Carson Steele, who is the priority ad in this Chiefs backfield. And I don't think it's as simple as just saying Carson Steele, but I don't know how you feel, Kyle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my preferred ad is Carson Steele, but it's clearly not a runaway ad. And the second reason that I made a last-minute switch on you, I mean, Carson Steele was the poster boy for the waiver wire article this week. I know they already talked about it on Happy Hour, and to me, up until a few hours ago, that was the case. But they're also bringing in Kareem Hunt, who is familiar with Andy Reid's system, for a visit. That strikes me as like, hey, are you remotely in shape? We need someone to come and run this system. And Carson Steele, as of joining the Chiefs, is a fullback H-back, like a fullback halfback hybrid. I don't think he is a
fumbler.
I am shocked they kept him in the game after that. I mean, that was while Pacheco was still healthy. He fumbles right before the end of the first half. They did bring him in for 2 short plunges right as they were ready to kick the game-winning field goal. That shows some faith. The fact that they immediately go out and are hosting Kareem Hunt for a visit suggests that at best we get a week of early down work for a pseudo fullback on a team that doesn't really care to run the football. To me, that really takes the excitement, takes the air out of the balloon on someone like Carson Steele, who I still think is the plurality favorite to see the early down work for this team while Pacheco is gone. But it's just a plurality. You could tell me, Samaje Perine weighs like 230 some odd pounds and was a true between the tackles workhorse in college back in the day. Like, we know he has that physicality to his game. Could get 10 carries, and that's enough to erase Carson Steele. Kareem Hunt in 2 weeks could come out and get 12 carries, enough to erase Carson Steele. So it's just so fraught with risk that he's my favorite ad. I think I wrote him as like a 10% fab bid in the waiver wire column. I initially had him as like 33% because I thought he was a good bet to be that guy. I think pretty likely addition of Kareem Hunt really throws cold water on it. I don't think there's a clear winner here, even if Carson Steele ended up leading the backfield in carries. 9 for 37, scoreless.
I think I'm leaning ever so slightly to Samaje Perine, but you just laid it out so well. This because I still feel like if I'm predicting roles in this backfield, for whatever reason, Samaje Perine, who I never thought was a third down guy until his final days in Cincinnati, somehow became one of the premier third down backs in the NFL. I feel like that's the easiest role to predict It was a little surprising he had not made more inroads on Isaiah Pacheco before Pacheco got injured. Now their hand is forced, of course. And I just feel like if I'm counting on anything for week 3, I might count on like 4 or 5 Samaje Perine receptions, but Carson Steele probably is the favorite at the goal line. We saw him getting that kind of usage yesterday. He said even before the injury, he got a carry in the red zone, I believe, right? I didn't make that up. I believe he actually got a carry.
Steele?
Yeah, Steele inside the 20.
Yeah, Steele was mixing in as the distant RB2 for between the tackles work. He ended up getting 7 carries to Perine 0. Some of those came after Pacheco left on nearly the final drive, I believe. But yeah, he was filling the de facto RB2 role. It was just they were comfortable with Pacheco getting all the snaps, so it's hard to say how much that was even worse. But you were right, yeah, that he was getting some work, a light amount, but that shows something.
I'll put you on the spot here a little bit. A player that we honestly might not know about. We know his name, but people are wondering about Jordan Whittington and the Rams receiver core. A guy who was steamed in the summer has been non-existent through the first 2 weeks. Any chance, though? I mean, now with everything going totally haywire, Sean McVay could just rip up the setup he has right now. He actually could just totally change things on the fly. Not the most likely outcome, of course. Are we telling people in, say, 14 team leagues to at least stash Jordan Whittington as the final guy on your bench? Anything positive to say about Jordan Whittington?
Yeah, like you said, he was a pretty big summer hype candidate, and the Rams beat reporters were kind of all over him. And then week 1 comes around, and rubber hits the road, and they don't play him almost any snaps, despite Puka getting hurt in week 1. Played more in week 2, but in the end, we still saw Tutu Atwell, who I thought Whittington might have just passed to the point where Tutu would be cut. That didn't happen, and then Tutu still plays in week 2 after Kupp goes down. I think there's a long-term avenue to, we just know what Tutu is, which you said is a role player who last year at parts, and then this year again, maybe is getting thrust into a more full-time role. But there's a reason they do not want him to play that role. And like you said, Tyler Johnson is a veteran practice squad plus level player who's getting called into action. Maybe Whittington is more than that, but his college numbers, which I'll give some context to in a minute, they just hardly exist. He just did not get the ball very often for an extended period of time in college. It's because he played at Texas with A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, who else? He played with Jatavian Sanders and an incredible crew of running backs for his entire college career. So he was buried, but it's not like he was buried behind Jamar Chase and he was buried behind Justin Jefferson, and that's why he couldn't make it. I struggled to really find optimism in his college stats, and the fact that he can't entirely pass Tutu Atwell or Tyler Johnson, it could just be a playbook familiarity thing, but it would be deeper rosters, 14 team, or more so dynasty. He should be rostered in every dynasty team. Redraft, it has to be deep.
So Tutu, it's one thing not to pass Tutu because I was whatever. Maybe Tutu is just the most well-defined role player in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Not passing. Though Tyler Johnson was the really, really alarming moment there.
Yeah.
For Tutu, I'll say, by the way, if the bank examiners already repossessed your RV, I could see him being a really, really poor man's Rashid Shaheed, maybe Tutu Atwell.
He was that last year. He had a few games where he popped up early in the season, and then even late, he had 1 or 2 games where it was 340, and you're like, that's useless. Touchdown. He did that even as they were kind of phasing him out because he's a good big playmaker. So really, really. But I agree, really poor man's Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. Sticking with the Rams, what's the panic level on Kyren Williams? Blake Corum did actually mix in finally on Sunday. That was pretty predictable development, to be honest. With the passing game in tatters, it stands to reason they have to run more. But the problem is the offensive line is just totally in tatters. They lost their left guard for at least.
Lost their left tackle too, is Nopum and Steve Avila. I hope I'm saying his name right.
Real bad. So they're going to have to run more, I think, by definition. But as we saw with Kyren against the Cardinals, really, really empty calorie type carries, not any production at all. Are we panicking with Kyren, or can maybe a theoretical increase in volume? It's not going to be a ton. He already had a lot of volume. Offset some of the overall environment questions, or just where are we at on Kyren Williams right now? A guy we wanted to panic on heading into the season and can now fully panic on.
Yeah, like you said, I really don't know how much we can. I really don't know how much we can offset the. I just don't. McVay's a good coach. I do not see how they survive this level of injuries. The offensive line injuries alone were going to cause problems, let alone the fact that truly they're running out now the worst receiving core in the NFL, and I'm not sure it's close, right? Like, I just don't even see a team that can compete with them in terms of lack of overall talent. Poor offensive line play, a generally immobile quarterback. I don't think it's entirely over because we saw with Josh Jacobs, the Packers had no business running a functional NFL offense because Malik Willis generally has not been capable of doing that. And yet Josh Jacobs just goes out and carries 30 some odd times for 150 yards. I think that's the path to Kyren getting there. And I still think we should expect him to dominate the carries in this backfield. But the ceiling case feels like it just got its knees chopped off. Like, it just doesn't have a chance to go out there and dominate the work for a good offense and score 22 touchdowns and score 16 touchdowns. Now the projection for touchdowns for the rest of the season is like 7. I think you muted yourself.
Having a rough show so far. I was trying to itch my eye earlier. I may need to do that one more time, Kyle Dvorchak. I just feel, even with the offensive line injuries and what is looking like a really poor overall running environment, I think I'm kind of aggressively adding Blake Corum because this, like, Sean McVay is the kind of coach who will find out a way, hopefully, to paper over offensive line deficiencies. The passing game, at least to a point. You know, there's no like magic button even an elite coach can press when the issues are as bad as the Rams are, but just with the lack of viable targets in the skill core, I mean, do they really have another option? Like, I just feel like they're going to have to maybe pivot to ball control offense. You're trying to protect Matthew Stafford from himself. Mm-hmm. Matthew Stafford behind this offensive line, just the way he plays, he's going to be begging for an injury.
I will note with Corum, I believe per PFF's Nathan Yonke, all of his snaps came in the final 5 minutes as they were down 30.
It's true, but I just think so. He wasn't, he didn't even touch the ball in week 1. Garbage time never really developed in week 1. So just even garbage time touches were a step forward for him in week 2. We see it all the time with rookies. Jalen Wright got on the field in week 2. It was also because of injuries, but he was fine. And I just think with seriously how tattered this receiver core is, they're going to have to rethink the whole offense. I think Blake Corum, he's going to start small, but I think you actually are going to see a standalone role develop for Blake Corum. That's just one man's opinion. Kyle, what is one man's opinion, sticking with Mr. Lindorfin's friend of the show? Hunter Henry, one of the only big tight end performances of the entire season from any player. It was his first 100-yard game in 5 years, just the second of his career. It was almost like a 50% target share. My quick spiel is that it's just a function of there's no other proven pass catchers in this entire receiver core, unless you want to count Pop Douglas, who barely counts. High probability. We just saw Hunter Henry's best statistical output of the season. But was it enough? When a guy catches 8 passes for 109 yards, you definitely take notice. You at least consider a waivers ad. What is your opinion on Mr. Hunter Henry?
Oh, yeah. He's the best waiver wire tight end. And I'm going to rank him ahead of Isaiah Likely. We saw immediately in week 2, the Isaiah Likely snaps get scaled back. And it's not because I don't think he's good or that he should be playing more often, but teams just don't run enough 12 personnel or 13 or 14 personnel or 22, whatever. 12 is the dominant multiple tight end sets we're ever going to see. Teams don't run enough 12 personnel to rarely, if ever, make a second tight end viable. And I just don't want to ever be in the position where I have to bet on an insane outlier to get the tight end 11 finish, right? It's not like if they run a bunch of 12 personnel, we're locking Likely in for a top 5 finish. If they set a 5-year high in 12 personnel, we can get, we're hoping for a Jonnu Smith with the Falcons level season. If they go as insane as Arthur Smith, the joker of current offensive coordinators, or when he was a head coach, the joker of head coaches, they have to get that level of away from NFL standards to make Likely just Jonnu Smith. So personally, I will rank Hunter Henry ahead. It's not fun nor sexy, but I just don't want to be in the position where my, my tight end position hinges on a team's literal backup, even if he is obviously going to be one of the higher volume backups.
Just off the top of your head, Hunter Henry, top 12 option for week 3.
I think so. It's mostly a testament to how bad tight end is.
Not just how bad, too. Evan Ingram, health questions. Jake Ferguson, health questions. Yes. David Njoku, health questions. That could maybe help get Henry over the top. I think if all 3 of those guys are healthy, we're probably not jamming him in the top.
I agree.
12.
Good point.
Probably still not jamming him into the top 12, just to be honest. But we'll see. I'm sitting down Tuesday morning to do it. El Chino Nick, by the way, wants to know if this is pre-recorded. It's not, Nick. You got a question, get it in. We'll stick with tight end.
Oh, Pat, you should have said yes. You should have said, is this that would have been such a mind bender.
PBD, which are my initials on the clock, wants to know, can Mike Gesicki save my mortgage? Sticking with tight end. Tight end is just the position where all the problems are this year, where if you did not get one of the elite guys, or even if you did, even if you got Dalton Kincaid, you might be like, what am I doing with my life? Can Mike Gesicki be a potential life hack at the worst position in fantasy right now?
I kind of struggle to see it, other than maybe he's a 4 for 40 weekly guy, but he's still running roughly half of the routes. I mean, exactly 51% this past week, 46%, if I remember correctly, in week 1. It's basically Tanner Hudson usage from, was it the end of last year or the end of 2 years ago? Was it
I believe the end of last year. Last year, they were really, really, really thin in that tight end group last year for the Bengals. They'd already gotten too many guys paid.
Yeah, and so it was, they really did. So it was Tanner Hudson out there, and you look at his targets per route run, which is like generally a pretty good talent stat. It's like if you go out there on a bunch of routes and you earn a bunch of targets, you're good. And he wasn't running any routes, and he was still getting a bunch of targets. Gesicki makes sense in that kind of role and did play that role last week. But do we really want to make the bet on a guy who gets 50% of the routes, and that a team that has Jamar Chase and will at one point have T. Higgins is saying we need to scheme Mike Gesicki touches? I don't want to make that bet. So I would not rank him as a top, like I would take Hunter Henry quite easily over him. Isaiah Likely, as much as I ragged on him for being a backup, he is a more talented backup, and he's going to play more as the backup than Gesicki will as the starter. So to me, I'd rank him as a top 16 or 18 tight end, somewhere in that range. And I put him in the waiver wire column as an ad, but that's when you're really getting desperate. Someone beats you to the Hunter Henry race.
I was to say tight end is so bad right now. Like tight end is kind of the worst position every year. Obviously, it's never been quite this bad. And it is kind of like, if you have one good performance, it's like, man, we're just getting you into the top 20. So Mike Gesicki, one good game, that's enough to just get him into the top 20 right now. Take a flyer. I say one talking point I feel like always tends to get disproven is like this quarterback loves to target tight ends. A lot of times it just turns out they love to target that particular tight end. Joe Burrow
I could not agree more.
But Joe Burrow seems like he actually likes to target tight ends. Is where I was going with that. Nah. So we will just see. A quick trade question from Mr. Woodboy 310. Would we trade Josh Jacobs for Mike Evans? We're assuming he likes his running backs, does not like his receivers. Mike Evans doing his Mike Evans thing, 2 touchdowns week 1, scoreless 3 for 42 in week 2. Would you make the trade? Josh Jacobs getting a lot of volume right now.
I think I would keep Josh Jacobs here, especially since we're kind of seeing him. I mean, it's 1 week, but if he can weather the Malik Willis storm, what a freaking hero. Because, I don't want to keep bagging on Malik Willis, but he just is not. There's a reason he was not the team starter, and the team that drafted him traded him before the end of his rookie deal. And he actually looked fine in week 2. He ran with a vomit-covered football, apparently. I don't know if you saw the clip going around. Fascinating stuff. So I'll say if he can just survive on volume for a few weeks and then come back and be a volume monster in a Jordan Love offense, I didn't draft a lot of him. This is me capitulating. I didn't. I hope you split it nice and evenly between Rachaad White and him, because
it was nice and evenly between Josh Jacobs and Kenneth Walker. So I'm 1 for 2 so far.
There you go.
1 for 2 so far. Yeah, Josh Jacobs, one of my boomer running backs. Yeah, who was getting RIP'd in both group texts and on Twitter after one bad half on shoddy turf in Brazil. Josh Jacobs has looked much better the past 3 halves. One of the questions of the day, Bryce Young benched. PBD OTC wants to know how many times will he target Deontay Johnson, but just what do you think the effects for the whole overall Panthers offense are of Andy Dalton being inserted into the starting lineup with the coach and Dave Canales, who already helped revive Geno Smith, then he helped revive Baker Mayfield. Maybe gets too much credit for that, blah, blah, blah. But it seems like a good quarterbacks coach. Can Deontay Johnson get back into the top 36 maybe? Let's start there.
Yeah, top 36, I think it's a good bar to start with, because I don't want to throw too much on Canales as far as he was this savior, as in we immediately see in Geno Smith's second game of this season, he did have a regression to the mean last year, sans Canales. but immediately throws for 320 something and makes JSN look like the superstar that he was in college. And then Baker Mayfield going scorched earth, in his first 2 games without Canales. So there's some give and take there, but I do generally think he's a good coach. And the offensive line has graded extremely well. And Bryce Young just isn't capable of doing anything with a good offensive line. So I think with not great weapons, but a receiver core that runs deeper than some other receiver cores at least, and has Deontay Johnson who's capable of getting open quickly, I think Dalton should do, quote, well. It's going to look a lot better, frankly, in this offense with Andy Dalton. So yeah, 15 or 20 is a little bit high, but I do think 8 or 9 targets with a high catch percent for Deontay feels pretty good.
I was the only real risk with Andy Dalton is a lot of times these veterans, he's like 36, 37 at this point. We underestimate just kind of how fragile they are. And he's in a state of his career. The archetype of the Andy Dalton quarterback gets hurt like a lot. And this might not last for long, is all I'll say with Andy Dalton. Like, he could get injured very quickly. It's very hard to stay healthy. At that age when you're not used to getting hit every week. It just seems like there's an extremely high injury rate for these backup quarterbacks. That'd be, beyond him being Andy Dalton.
To your point, Tyrod, it happened to Jacoby Brissett last year, took over for Sam Howell and couldn't make it a game and a half. Mariota.
Teddy Bridgewater every time he played. Mariota every time he played. Yeah. So it's just something, it might work for a week or two, but you might not be out of the woods.
Is this a sell high window coming for guys like Leggett and Deontay possible when the offense pops for, 280 and 3 touchdowns or whatever in the passing game?
Xavier Leggett had 0 targets, by the way. Cosmic Dealer wants to talk about someone you have in your waiver wire column, Quentin Johnston, who he was the number 2 receiver in terms of targets and usage in week 1. He was clearly the number 1 in week 2 for the Chargers. It was still only 5 catches on 6 targets for a quarterback who attempted 20 passes in Justin Herbert. But 2 touchdowns for Quentin Johnston. One of them is really, really impressive. With all the caveats aside about the Chargers, how run heavy they are, blah, 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 blah. Are we adding Quentin Johnston across the board in 12-team leagues? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's going to be frustrating because they're going to I wrote before the season that I really like the Chargers as a team to stack because at the end of the day, you can get a top, argue about it however you want, a top 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 quarterback talent as the QB 17. I really like that bet. And Jim Harbaugh is going to make the defense better. But can he really make them a top 2 or 3? Oh, he did it instantly. They're instantly a top 2 or 3 defensive unit. I will say, small sample, when 50% of your games come against Bryce Young, you're going to have really good stats. But they're a really good defense, and they're running the ball really well because they have put together one of the best offensive lines in the NFL after tons and tons of investments into said offensive line. They're going to be able to run the ball as often as they want in most games. I would not bet on Quentin Johnston to lead the team in targets if I had to make my bet, but he looks immensely better than he did last year at creating separation, at earning targets, even the fact that he's not all of his catches are contested, but when they have been, he's actually been catching them. These are all improvements from his game that were complete deal breakers for him last year. Of course, the touchdowns are nice, but it shows up in his yards per route run, which is well over 2 now as well. I don't know if he's the team's wide receiver 1, but I think it's certainly within the range of outcomes. And even if he is just a high efficiency wide receiver 2, these are all reasons to add him. The production it will be spiky. You can't have a nice high floor on this style of offense, but he's a former first round pick who is now looking good in his second season with entire new staff around him. I can see how his rookie season would be misleading, and he's good. So he should be added in all regular redraft formats.
Jim Harbaugh, I don't know why some people needed this reminder right after he just won the national championship last year. Just one of the most gifted football coaches to ever live. A guy, one of the most left for dead NFL players ever was Alex Smith heading into 2011 with the San Francisco 49ers. And Jim Harbaugh immediately turned that around. Not that surprising to see him turn around a second-year first-round receiver. And it's been 2 not great teams, even though the Raiders just beat the Ravens. But one thing really good teams do is easily take care of business against bad teams. I'm interested to see how the Chargers and Steelers go this week. 2 teams that want to play the same way. That's going to be kind of a crazy game. But Jim Harbaugh, man, you really, really, really got to give him credit. Mukara wants to wonder, is it Jover for Xavier Worthy? You had the 2 touchdowns in week 1, but where he kind of just ran in a straight line, as the Bengals DB said. Didn't do anything in week 2. The Chiefs passing game, just in general, did nothing against the Bengals. I'm assuming you're not going to say it's over for Xavier Worthy. Just a needed reminder of how boom or bust this game is going to be. His game is going to be. What do you want to tell the folks about Xavier Worthy?
Yeah, like you said, I'm not going to say it's over. He was still second on the team's wide receiver room in terms of routes, but it's clearly Rashee Rice gets basically all the snaps, all the routes, and then Xavier Worthy's number 2 receiver, but he's not on the field for every play, and that's already frustrating. But then when he's not a true elite target earner, it further squeezes the targets down to where you are counting on hopefully 4 to 5 targets, and one of them hits the home run, and he's a good bet to hit a home run on a per target basis, but you're still counting on that. Like, we're going to get regression to the mean for Rashid Shaheed. He's going to be a similar type of player, but the fact you can comp the two together tells us that we maybe got a little out over our skis after the week 1 2 touchdown performance. But am I still starting him? Yeah, I mean, he's still going to make my flex spot because, like, I like guys who can win me a matchup in 1 week, even if, they're also going to dud a few times, a lot. Honestly.
We've all been so PPR brained that we've moved away from this archetype of player. But there's just a guy like Rashid Shaheed or like Gabe Davis of yore, even MVS of yore in Green Bay. You have to be willing to play guys, even when they have 0-point floors, who can flip a matchup on 2 or 3 targets. That is what Xavier Worthy did in week 1. Definitely not the last time he's going to do that. You just have to take the bad with the good. We got the bad on Sunday. More good is coming. Chad, a weekly viewer, wants to know, has Andre Yoshivas done enough to push the eventual T. Higgins target share more into the realm of the previous Tyler Boyd share? Basically, if you're a T. Higgins manager, are you worried about Yoshivas kind of like carving out a targets floor of his own while he's been out, or not really?
No, I mean, didn't he like literally catch 2 passes this past week? Yeah. Look, as someone who was grinding the overlay on the 4 p.m. slate on DraftKings and was like, Yoshivas, I'm not going to get to him in this lineup. And he catches 2 passes. Must have been great. Faded the Yoshivas shock, and he scores 2 touchdowns. Not loving that, but honestly, like, yeah, it is good to catch touchdowns. I'm not going to say like it doesn't count. His coaches will take notice of that. But he hasn't shown an ability to earn a ton of targets or do a ton with his targets or do a ton with his high, 100% route rate. And all of that tells me that he's like a clear rotational receiver 3 who has been thrust into a larger role. And he, quote, made the most of the role last week, but with only 2 catches. So I don't feel that concerned for T. Higgins specifically.
Yeah, I just think he meant the Chad mentions Tyler Boyd. He is Tyler Boyding. Andre is the one Tyler Boyding, not T. Higgins. T. Higgins will be returning to the T. Higgins role. We have a question about Sam Laporta. Only 6 catches for 58 scoreless yards through 2 games. Jameson, one thing Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta never counted on was an actually good downfield receiver arriving in this offense. Jameson Williams, I think 79 yards each of the first 2 weeks. We're concerned, of course, about there being an option 3 in this offense. I mean, how concerned are we really in relation to Sam Laporta? Any chance Sam Laporta basically falls out of the top 3 at tight end? Let's set the bar there.
You said top 3, and that is somehow an extremely low bar because it's like one good George Kittle game. Immediately, I'm like, hell yeah, George Kittle, top 2 tight end, and rookie Brock Bowers are our top tight ends right now. So top 3 is actually somehow a very low bar. I do think there's a chance he falls out of the top 3 because you look at his rookie season, and it was good in the context of him being a rookie tight end. But it wasn't like the, even adjusting for position, the Jamar Chase, like Justin Jefferson rookie season where you're like, this guy's one of the best ever. He didn't go for 1,000 yards. He caught a bunch of touchdowns. I think he is really good. But like when I look at what Trey McBride did it was his 2nd season, but when I look at that season to me was much more impressive from all the efficiency metrics. It was a good season with a lot of touchdowns in a very bad season for the tight end position that made Laporta the tight end 1 in redraft. But I think the tier of tight end 1 was so malleable. Like, I think George Kittle is a good bet to finish as the tight end 1 this year, and he was being drafted as the tight end 7. You couldn't have said that about how the tight end position was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. There was a top 3. One of 3 guys is going to finish, and there's no other contenders. Laporta could fall as low as 4, 5, or 6, and it wouldn't surprise me. And that's just because tight end 1, as the top 6 or 7 go, is pretty flat. And I do think it's a bit of a concern that there are other players who can draw targets from him. And we did see in week 2 that as much as You can make that argument for Amon-Ra. No, you can't. He gets a bunch of targets still. So I'm a little concerned for him. The other part of this question, including McLaurin, makes it kind of an easy move. I don't think this Commanders offense is built to get McLaurin fantasy points.
So you would trade Sam Laporta and Terry McLaurin for Jamar Chase? You're telling yes. Mr. Noyce? I don't know. We just talked about how in shambles tight end is. So I don't know about trading a top 4 or 5 tight end.
Well, Laporta is probably part of the reason it's in shambles is we were thinking we were getting a bunch of fantasy points from him and it just hasn't materialized.
And the main principle always in 2-for-1 deals, who is the best player in the deal? Still unquestionably Jamar Chase. We have 2 questions about Garrett Wilson. Metro is panicking about Garrett Wilson. He's 0-2. He wants to know if he should continue to panic. And Slanted and Enchanted, Mr. Pavement himself, is wondering if Garrett Wilson is a sell low, or is he a buy low or a sell low? I could see an argument for selling low and Garrett Wilson, to be honest, but I could also very easily see arguments for buying low. What is your party line right now on Garrett Wilson, Kyle?
I have to pick one if he's a buy low or a sell low.
You do.
If I had to pick, I mean, I guess I'll go buy low. I don't buy that Allen Lazard is going to be out there getting 50% of the team's air yards. I believe he'll be running routes.
Is this a super run heavy team? And Aaron Rodgers, even with hyper talented player, seems to insist on the mind meld, and maybe he doesn't have the mind meld yet. With Garrett
I don't know.
Wilson's.
He's got cool handshakes with Garrett Wilson.
Yeah,
you see him chatting it up and hanging out. I'm going to say if I have to pick one, I'll buy low. I don't think the thing is, I don't think the Garrett Wilson manager is giving you a discount after 2 quiet games in which he still, after 2 weeks, has an elite target share. It's just that it hasn't manifested in big fantasy outings. I will say, I think some of the concerns around this offense are proving correct, as you talked about. Slow, run heavy. Aaron Rodgers is a 41-year-old quarterback who hasn't been good since 2021. I don't think he's bad, but do I think he's MVP Aaron Rodgers? It would seem to be the answer is no. So I think some of the concerns are manifesting, but they're not the floor falling out concerns. By the time you listen to this podcast, we'll have already had a little more information. Kirk Cousins is having the floor has fallen out concerns. Aaron Rodgers looks more than physically capable of leading in an appropriate NFL offense, but they're not setting the world on fire. I think the Garrett Wilson manager in the year of our Lord 2024 knows all of this, knows he's extremely talented. But I will say, if I can catch a panicking Garrett Wilson manager, I'll at least throw out some offers.
I'm seeing news I'm trying to confirm is true before I say something, by the way.
You can drop it in chat to me if you want.
No, I'm not going to drop it in the chat right now. I froze, though. Tim wants to know, should he trade CeeDee Lamb and Brian Thomas Jr. for Nico Collins and Travis Etienne?
I don't think so. I think that's Nico's so freaking good, man. Nico Collins is incredible at football. I still do think that CeeDee, especially now that we talked about Bengals offense looking a little shaky. Justin Jefferson banged up, but is still the GOAT. But then Tyreek Hill is catching passes from Skylar Thompson. CeeDee is still a top 3 talent on an offense that I think will be better going forward. We'll see. So I'm going to call him a top 2 or 3 fantasy wide receiver. I'm still going to put Nico Collins in that 7 to 10 range, but honestly, it's moved up since the draft. And I think Etienne is concerning me more and more every week. I don't know that he's that good. I think his best asset in the NFL has been accumulating touches. Don't love that guy from a season-long perspective. So I'm going to stick with, as you talked about earlier, in any sort of trade, who has the best player? CeeDee is still the best player, and I like Brian Thomas a lot.
So first off, don't answer Maiko's question because it's a 2-part question. You'll see. He said, what's up with Brandon Ayuk? Should I get rid of him? Now here's the stunning reveal. This is a copy and paste from me of an Adam Schefter tweet that Deebo Samuel strained his calf. Deebo's annual injury is here.
Oh, man.
He's expected to miss several weeks. How does this change things for 49ers offense? Already missing Christian McCaffrey, for at least the next 3 games. Deebo probably now at least the next 2. What are we going to see from the 49ers playing the Rams? And the Rams is really ragged defense this Sunday in LA.
I think we're going to Brandon Ayuk take over. I mean, we saw this last year. I know the 49ers in general have had a slow start. Ayuk chief among them. I don't want to blame it all on the holdout, but I do think it's fair to say not practicing for the entire offseason, probably not good for your continuity with your team. I haven't looked at data for week 2. I know in week 1, he was seeing fewer first read looks than 2 of the other pass catchers on his team. probably because you didn't spend a lot of time practicing with the team, but he was last year. I think in that Nico Collins range of like all the advanced metrics say this guy is incredible. Well, the film watchers must have a different taste. No, they love him too. Just everyone loves him, but the volume isn't quite there. Or for Nico Collins, it was he got hurt and then Tank Dell stole some volume from him. But I think in all the ways we can surmise talent, Brandon Ayuk is incredible. And honestly, you could say the same for George Kittle. He's the most efficient tight end of my lifetime. He's not quite the most productive, although he has one of the best seasons ever at tight end. So I do think this is like really strong for Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, with maybe the one caveat that I think you will enjoy talking about this is 49ers floor when they don't have the best left tackle, the best receiving core, the best running back in the NFL has seemingly been very low over the past few years.
They're
so
getting exposed.
Go for that. I knew you were going there.
No, they are not. So first things first, the bank examiner's already made himself a co-manager of my Dynasty League team with Brandon Ayuk. So I really hope you're correct about that. Ricky Pearsall could be back in 2 games. Are we adding Juwan Jennings without Mr. Deebo Samuel? Is Juwan Jennings a must-add? He's running a lot of routes, playing a lot of snaps. Would we consider Juwan Jennings a must-add, or is this just the classic? It's filtering. There's more targets to the elite guys who are already like kind of lords of the flying each other for targets, and now they just get more of the pie to themselves.
No, actually, Jennings is a good call for an ad. I mean, Jennings is another guy who doesn't see the field a ton because they don't play a ton. They play a pretty low rate of 11 personnel because they have a fullback, they use multiple tight ends. But when he's out there and when he's getting targeted, he's like good on a per target basis. Every one of his catches is somehow like a 3rd and 15 first down or a touchdown, or he throws for a touchdown. So I do think that if he gets more involved, he can be vaguely fantasy viable, but it is a short-term high variance play where like, if Demarcus Robinson is on your waiver wire, I'm adding Demarcus Robinson. He's just a clear bet for a far larger role. And a team that will probably pass more. They won't do it as efficiently, but they will pass more. So someone like Demarcus Robinson, I think, is a clear better ad. But Jennings should probably be rostered in over like half of Yahoo leagues because we're getting so many injuries. You're going to need to start guys like him.
So many injuries. I think Juwan Jennings should go north of 50% in 12-team leagues, I'll say. Oren Darling, again, by the time you listen to this podcast, if you're not watching live, the Falcons will have already played a second game. So maybe Tyler Algier does more tonight than he did in week 1. But Tyler Algier looked droppable in week 1, Kyle. Would you drop Tyler Algier for someone like a Chiefs running back, say Kareem Hunt, who's not officially signed yet? But basically, are you considering Tyler Algier already on the chopping block after barely contributing week 1?
Yeah, I mean, this is always the problem with guys like Blake Corum, Tyler Algier, is your roster has to be set up to weather the storm of these guys aren't playing enough to get into your lineup. Maybe they'll pop up randomly like Braylon Allen did in week 2 for 2 touchdowns, but he was still a distant second on the team, got doubled up in overall touches, I believe. And even if Algier pushes his snaps, his touches forward a little bit tonight at the time of this recording, it's not enough for you to be starting him. But the payoff, should anything happen to the starter, is enormous. I don't know what the payoff is for Kareem Hunt. Like, he's not, at this point in his career, he is in no way dominating the carries, the snaps, the receptions. Maybe he can get a stranglehold in the goal line work. He kind of did that at times in Cleveland last year. But the Chiefs don't run at the goal line. So I would not be making this move. I think you can move farther down the running back contingency list and say there are some guys who maybe you can take the gamble on Kareem Hunt for, but Algier to me is still one of the premium, quote, handcuff type of players.
He also has a bit of a standalone role still, I would assume, especially after what we saw from Kirk in week 1. They might go a little more run-based, Arthur Smith getting the last laugh type of deal. Speaking of running back, I'll put you a little bit on the spot about a good buy low running back. We have one viewer suggest maybe Zach Moss. I have a few other guys that I could suggest for you, Kyle. Travis Etienne, Rashad White, DeAndre Swift, who's had a really rough go.
These are all bad.
Maybe Jahmyr Gibbs, Javonte Williams. Do any of those guys strike you as a buy low or no?
These guys are all bad picks. Man, you didn't name a single good one.
Well, there's no buy low running backs right now. What about Jahmyr Gibbs? People are probably getting a little antsy with Jahmyr Gibbs. Not quite. He's not running as pure. He was running pure last year, something you warned me about over the summer. He is not running pure through the first 2 games. He's such an explosive guy and such a good offense. He did catch 7 balls against the Bucs So yeah, we're sending out buy low offers and Jahmyr Gibbs. How about that one?
Yeah, I think that one's fine. It's kind of the same. It's the bet we always knew we were making, but maybe you can catch a panicking manager. I got one for you, Kenneth Walker, because Zach Charbonnet is such a jag, man. And look,
no good.
You got what you drafted in Zach Charbonnet. He was a very cheap contingent back. You know, he was on the spectrum of the Tyler Algiers, where maybe has a standalone role, but really you're drafting him for should the starter get hurt. I can pick up a lot of free touches, and that's exactly what happened, and he scored. But he didn't see many. He saw very few snaps until Ken Walker got hurt in week 1. And then when he gets the start, he's just not that. He's not particularly explosive, but he's not an elite pass catcher. He just doesn't do anything above a B- level, probably. That strikes me as very, very good for Ken Walker when he comes back. And we saw Ken Walker got a ton of light boxes in week 1, and the offense started doing the thing where they print yards in week 2. This feels like a situation where when he's healthy, which it may take some time, he could really rack up some fantasy points. So if you have the ability to hold what is a dead roster spot for maybe another 2 to 3 weeks, I think he could come back in and continue to dominate the snaps and the touches overall, because his competition for touches, frankly, just isn't particularly great.
It's clear Zach Charbonnet was just a special Pete Carroll project and barely saw the field in week 1. One game in week 2, but just thoroughly unimpressive runner. A guy who every once in a while lowers the boom and really doesn't do anything else. JR wants to know, everyone wants to get rid of Terry McLaurin. JR has a Commanders-themed avatar. He seems to be in hell with Terry McLaurin. Would you trade Terry McLaurin and Isaiah Likely for Trey McBride?
Oh, easily, without a doubt.
So yes, that's the kind, not to like freak you out. You need to click confirm before the other guy gets cold feet.
You need to check Rotoworld to make sure you're not getting like hit by news, like, oh, McBride twisted his whatever and is going to miss a month, and now that's why the offer was sent to you, and then click confirm. Yeah,
because even if McLaurin kind of heats up a little bit, the Trey McBride is just so much more important at such a thin position than Terry McLaurin's ever going to be a receiver. Terry McLaurin, just pretty clear, has no shot at being an every week wide receiver 2, and you trade a wide receiver 3 for a tight end 1 if you can do so. Let's see here. I'm going to try and add Mike Gesicki. Yeah, sorry. I clicked a question I didn't want to click, Kyle. Blah, blah, blah. Were there any good picks this year? Daniel wonders as I'm looking for another question.
Not that I made.
No, I haven't heard of a single good pick so far in all of fantasy this year. Metro.
Do they play for the Saints? Oh, Chris Olave. No, not that one. Don't pick that one.
So Metro has got Jordan Love and Tua, both of which are near certain not to play this week. Yeah. Does he roll with David Carr? People wondering if they can trust David Carr, because let's be real, we've been burned by David Carr a lot. This is a question Derek. I actually got via text.
This one's
today.
Derek.
Do you want Derek Carr or do you want Sam Darnold over the next month, or just the rest of season? Fine, just go rest of season. Do you want Derek Carr or do you want Sam Darnold, Kyle?
Give me Derek. I mean, I do think Darnold's. I have them both in the waiver wire column, and they're similarly rostered, I believe. So it's kind of your choice as to which one you want. But like, who do I think is better in a vacuum? We have a large sample of Derek Carr being like fine, and a very large sample of Sam Darnold being very bad. Do I think he's that bad anymore? Absolutely not. I do think the system he's been put in is going to really, it already has really done wonders for him. But I think Derek Carr's floor is higher, but clearly his ceiling's higher. They have 91 points in 2 games. So
the second most this century through the first 2 games of the season.
Yeah, 4th most all time, I think, maybe 5th most.
1 point ahead of the 2013 Broncos. Someone here wondering if they can drop Colby Parkinson for Trey Benson. They got burned horribly by Colby Parkinson in week 2. I feel like the Rams have to get these Colby Parkinson targets, but I also felt that way in week 2, Kyle. So let's start. Is Colby Parkinson droppable even after the Cooper Kupp injury? And is Trey Benson addable after James Conner had a really big week 2?
Yeah, I assume any production we got from Trey Benson, he ended up with 11 carries and a target. I haven't looked closely into the data. My strong assumption there is that came from the 30-some point blowout of the Rams and will not happen in most other game scripts. Colby Parkinson, I mean, the thing with a guy like Colby Parkinson is the same with like Cade Otton or Tyler Conklin or any of these guys who get a bunch of snaps and aren't very good, is they're going to give you a lot of games where they go 5 for 40 and a touchdown in some of those. And in this tight end environment, that's really good. but they're not good enough to have a floor that is 4 or 5 catches as we saw. But I do think, like you said, what other options do they have? Tyler Johnson, Texas's 4th receiver in 2023, Jordan Whittington. Like, they're just, you have to project the targets to go somewhere. And right now, I believe he is 2nd in the NFL in routes because that's how Sean McVay uses his tight ends, as in like singular. They don't use a second tight end. It's every snap goes to Colby Parkinson or whoever, Higbee, whoever it may be in that given week. And they paid Colby Parkinson a lot of money in the offseason. So I am probably still keeping Colby Parkinson, assuming as this person writes in, they don't have any other options.
We're going to do a few rapid fire ones here, Kyle. Put a percentage on Braylon Allen of your fab budget. Because Braylon Allen, this is going to be the week he's going to get added. But, he's not going to be that startable right off the bat. He could be like a desperation flex. But basically, if you're going to get Braylon Allen in your league, this probably has to be the week. So what percent of your fab would you spend on Mr. Braylon Allen?
Yeah, I mean, as you pointed out, how startable is he? Breece Hall doubled him up in snaps, targets, carries, and not to say that he wasn't used at all. It was 7 carries and 4 targets, but that's not a ton. And the reason he is such an exciting ad is because of the 2 touchdowns he scored. But do we think he can average? Obviously, we don't think he can average 2 touchdowns. He can't even average 1. Like, no one averages 1 touchdown except for Raheem Mostert last year. So is he really startable this week? Vaguely on that RB4-5 sort of range where, injuries have already hit us pretty hard. Some people will be forced to start him, but it's not one you're excited to start. You're doing anything you can to figure out which PPR scam Josh Reynolds is going to project for 3 more fantasy points than him. I'm probably sitting at like 20 to 25%. He does look like one of the premier backups, but there are a lot of Blake Corum's one of the premier backups. Tyler Algier is one of the premier backups. Zach Charbonnet is one of the lesser talented ones, but is one guy who steps in and sees all the carries. So he's one of the good backups, but I don't think he's one of the committee. This guy can start for me some weeks unless you're really desperate. It's not one you want to make.
I might only be doing 9 to 10% of my fab budget on Braylon Allen. Braylon, the bull case on Braylon is, of course, not the touchdowns. It's that the Jets, I've seen their passing game personnel. They're like, this is even worse than we thought. Like, they haven't targeted Xavier Gibson through 2 games, for example. And like, they just have decided they have to be a 2-back offense. And he's going to be playing 20 to 30% of the snaps every week. And it just keeps him kind of flex viable. That is the bull case right now for Braylon, which he needs to be added. He needs to be rostered in the league. He was already rostered in a lot of leagues. He needs to be added. But that's what you're kind of hoping for, is like 30% of the snaps in like a best case scenario.
Yes.
Would you trade Marvin Harrison Jr. for Jamar Chase?
I'm still taking Chase straight up over Marv. As someone who, boy, did I have fun taking the victory laps, even though he only caught passes in the first quarter. I think it helps when you end the game yourself, when you just call ball game 2 times in the first quarter and the other team can't score. I still think our projection on Chase in terms of a talent, in terms of the domination of the offense, is so high. And I still think his quarterback's better, at least in terms of producing overall passing yards, especially. That Chase ranks over Harrison in terms of season-long projection. But I get that the gap has probably shrunk a little bit, more so on the Chase feeling shaky than Marvin even, because like if you just split Marvin's stats between 2 games, it looks just fine. It doesn't look super special. So yeah, I'll still take Chase, but I get that it feels a little bit touch and go with Chase right now.
A few more quick ones. The eternal question with Rashid Shaheed, is he a sell high? Are we selling high on Rashid Shaheed after his 496-1 performance against the Cowboys?
Yeah, I love what the Saints are doing right now. Pre-snap motion, varying their personnel, play action. It's all coming together. But like, obviously, Rashid Shaheed is a sell high, given that you can get, in this case, what I would call a king's ransom. The question is for Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins. I would take Teagan straight up over him rest of season, even though I get that like it feels very frustrating to have T. Higgins on your roster right now, but also getting the upside shot of the Commanders start to turn their passing game around, and McLaurin is clearly the number 1. This to me is the perfect sell high scenario.
It is. I would probably take either of those guys straight up over Rashid Shaheed still. Ray wants to know, better pickup this week, Deontay Foreman or Cam Akers? We don't know Joe Mixon's status heading into week 3.
If you really, really have to start, like say Jaleel McLaughlin is your RB2. He's just not playable right now with the way that offense is running. it has to be Foreman because we don't know Joe Mixon's status for sure. But if you have other viable running back twos, not even good running back twos, just a viable option, like a Carson Steele, for example, if you already had him, like if you had in a dynasty league, you already had him, I would say Akers, because the upside for Akers is that he's just the starting running back for the Houston Texans, whereas Foreman, he's the 1B at best for the Cleveland Browns. So it depends what you need. In a vacuum, I'll say Akers.
Two more. This one, someone had a JSN question earlier. This is kind of a, not going to tell our viewers much. Who finished the season with more points, though? T. Higgins or JSN? JSN 12 catches or 117 yards on Sunday.
Well, since I get to sort of interpret the question as I want, T. Higgins having not played yet, I don't think T. Higgins will be able to catch JSN, given that I don't know if he plays in
rest of season. We're throwing out the PPR bonanza that JSN had on Sunday.
I still think it's JSN because I don't know when T. Higgins is going to return, and I don't know in what capacity he returns in right away. Whereas we saw exactly what we are hoping for from the Seahawks. Tons of 11 personnel, tons of passing, chunk gains, and the very young receiver just clearly in terms of target domination in JSN playing ahead of Tyler Lockett. It all felt very, very positive for the Seahawks, despite them like scoring 20 some odd points in overtime. But in terms of how they scored the points, it was how we want the scam to run. Someone
whose trade question we answered earlier said, thank you. Asking if we're ready for the game, said he's making a beer run. Please get me a beer, sir. Is Christian Kirk droppable from Kevin? This is one of our final two questions, Kyle.
No, but I also think it's a relatively weak waiver wires. I'm talking about Carson Steele and Demarcus Robinson as the best pickups right now. So that doesn't say a ton for this week. I do think, like, let's say this was last week and Jordan Mason was on waivers. Kirk is absolutely droppable. Like, if there are league winners out there, Kirk is not a league winner. I think that's been revealed to us. But it's just a quiet week on waivers.
Someone is wondering about Rashid Shaheed straight up versus Jameson Williams. I think JMO is kind of honestly the deluxe version of Rashid Shaheed, but do you share that opinion?
I do. I mean, I especially think in terms of talent ceiling, we're a bit removed from Jameson Williams' college profile. But if he lives up to 80% of that hype as a high first round pick with an elite season in Alabama, he can be a truly special player, whereas Rashid Shaheed can be an extremely efficient but not high volume player in the course of a full season.
Kyle, thank you so much. Our viewers and listeners, thank you so much for the questions. Really good stuff. A little less crazy of a week on waivers than it was last week. Even with the big name injuries, it's more people are getting hurt, which creates the openings. We just don't know who's filling them. So it's kind of a frustrating week on waivers, but check out Kyle's waivers column as he attempts to answer all these questions. Check out Denny Carter's regression files later this week that will delve into a lot of the same issues. Check out my rankings on Thursdays. I try to sort through all this. And then check out Denny and I on Tuesday when the Rotoworld football show returns. So for Mr. Kyle Dvorchak, I'm Patrick Daugherty. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in one day.